Part 3. The Return of the King and the Final Judgment. The index finger of Arthur Vance moved. Just a slight twitch, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. But to Arthur, it was an entire universe. It was proof that he wasn't dead yet, that his will still existed, that the machine he had built over 40 years couldn't completely crush him. Leo cheered, his brown eyes bright with childlike joy. "Mr. Arthur, you moved. You're holding my hand." Arthur couldn't speak. His throat only produced meaningless, distorted sounds. But the left corner of his mouth, the only part of his face that still worked, curved into a smile. A small, weak smile, but one that contained all the determination of a man who had once made Wall Street tremble. Sarah stood at the door, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had witnessed many patients recover during her 15 years as a nurse, but she had never seen anything like this. A man completely paralyzed for 85 days, abandoned by his own family, betrayed by the person he trusted most. And now he was moving again, just because a 5-year-old boy had chosen to stay with him instead of going to the zoo. Elena walked into the room, saw Arthur's finger moving, and froze. She didn't know what to feel. Joy, relief, or fear that he would recover and go back to being the cruel man who had fired her. But then she saw Arthur's eyes, and she understood immediately. His pale blue eyes, eyes that had once been cold as ice, now didn't contain triumph or arrogance. They held something deeper, more primal, gratitude and pleading. Arthur looked at Sarah, then at Elena, and he signaled with his eyes, a sharp, alert look, completely different from the vague expression of a stroke patient. He moved his lips, trying to speak, and after several attempts, a single word came out. "Hide." Sarah frowned. "Hide what, Mr. Vance?" Arthur looked toward the door, then back at Sarah, and continued, each word difficult. "Evelyn must not know." And in that moment, Sarah understood. She understood that Arthur Vance, the king of Wall Street, the man who had once controlled billions of dollars with a single phone call, was planning. He wasn't just recovering physically. He was strategically reborn. That same afternoon, after Elena and Leo had left, Sarah followed Arthur's instructions. She called Dr. Marcus Chen, the director of the rehabilitation facility. Marcus wasn't just a good doctor. He was an old friend of Arthur's from Yale, someone Arthur had helped extensively during his early career. When Marcus heard Sarah explain the situation, he was silent for a long moment, then said, "I'll be right there." 2 hours later, Marcus arrived in Arthur's room along with another man, Carlton Webb, Arthur's personal attorney for the past 20 years. Carlton didn't work for Vance Capital. He had his own law firm in Manhattan, specializing in complex litigation and asset protection for the ultra-wealthy. He was the only person Arthur truly trusted because Carlton didn't care about money or power. He only cared about justice. When Carlton saw Arthur, he stopped at the door, his eyes filled with surprise. "Arthur, you!" Arthur nodded slightly, then signaled for Sarah to close the door. He looked at Carlton, and in a slow, difficult but clear voice he said, "Need help. Evelyn, betrayed. Need to hide, recovery." Carlton sat down, taking out his notebook. "What do you want me to do? Medical records, fake them. Say, no progress. Evelyn believes. Hopeless," Marcus interjected. "Arthur, this violates medical ethics." Arthur looked at Marcus, his eyes sharp as knives. "Marcus, she left me on the floor for 18 minutes. She used a mother's fear to threaten deportation. She wanted me dead. I need time." Marcus was silent. He looked at Carlton, then at Arthur, and finally nodded. "All right. I'll adjust the records. We'll report that you're showing no significant progress, that the prognosis remains very poor. But Arthur, this can only last a few months. If Evelyn gets suspicious and requests an independent evaluation, I'll be ready by then," Arthur said. Carlton asked next, "What about evidence? Do you have any proof of what Evelyn did?" Arthur looked at Sarah. "Camera, 80th floor, morning of February 14th. Carlton nodded. "I'll collect it, but I need a witness, Elena Vargas." "Will she be willing to testify in court?" Arthur was silent for a moment. Then he said, his voice softer, "Ask her, but don't force her. She's suffered enough." The next 3 weeks passed in a silent battle. Outwardly, Arthur remained a patient with hemiplegia, unable to speak, requiring full-time care. The official medical records stated that he was showing no significant progress, that the prognosis remained very poor, that the possibility of recovery was nearly impossible. Evelyn Cross visited twice, each time bringing flowers and a fake smile. She sat beside Arthur's bed, talking about the successes of the company under her leadership, about how she was protecting Arthur's legacy. And Arthur lay there, eyes open but lifeless, face expressionless, playing the role of a man who had lost everything. But inside, when no one was watching, Arthur was fighting. He did physical therapy 6 hours a day, with Marcus and the trusted medical team. He practiced moving his fingers, then his hand, then his arm. Every morning he spent 2 hours practicing speech with the language therapist. Each syllable, each word, each short sentence. And most importantly, he thought. He thought about everything that had happened. About that Tuesday morning when he signed the memo firing Elena without a second's hesitation. About how he had looked at Leo through the elevator gap, his face expressionless, as if the boy didn't exist. About those 18 minutes he lay on the marble floor, trying to scream but unable to, while Elena sat in the stairwell, biting her lip raw to keep from crying out. He had built an empire, but he had lost everything that truly mattered. And now, when he finally understood that, he had to decide what he would do with this second chance. Every afternoon at 3:40, Leo arrived. The boy walked into the room with his Tupperware container of chicken rice. His sneakers flashing blue lights, his face serious as a little doctor. He climbed onto the stool, opened the container, and began feeding Arthur. "Mr. Arthur, today I drew a picture at school," Leo said one Tuesday afternoon, feeding Arthur while telling stories. "I drew a house, but my house doesn't have a door." Arthur looked at the boy, waiting. Leo explained, "Because if there's a door, people can close it, and if they close it, people will be lonely. I don't want anyone in my house to be lonely." Arthur felt his throat tighten. He looked at Leo, the 5-year-old boy he had once considered a risk variable, a problem to eliminate, and he realized that this child was wiser than all the CEOs he had ever met. Leo continued feeding, and when Arthur swallowed the last spoonful, the boy placed his hand on the back of Arthur's right hand, the hand that could now move slightly, though still weak. "Mr. Arthur," Leo said, his voice serious. "Do you know why I come here every day?" Arthur shook his head slightly. Leo smiled. "Because my mom says when someone is in darkness, you have to bring light, even if it's just a small candle." The boy squeezed Arthur's hand gently. "And Mr. Arthur, you're my candle. Because you taught me that, even though I'm small, I can still do something important." Arthur closed his eyes, and 2 tears rolled down his cheeks. Not tears of weakness, not tears of helplessness, but tears of awakening. In the following weeks, something miraculous happened. Arthur didn't just recover physically, he recovered spiritually. He began asking Sarah about her life, her family, her dreams. He listened, truly listened, when she talked about the difficulties of her work, about the patients she had cared for, about the moments that made her believe she was doing something meaningful. He started talking to the other nurses, asking their names, asking about their children, about their lives. And he realized that for 40 years he had lived among thousands of people but had never truly seen them. He had looked but not seen, heard but not listened, existed but not lived. And now when he finally opened his eyes, the world was filled with colors he had never known. Every afternoon when Leo came, Arthur found himself smiling more. He listened to the boy talk about school, about friends, about the pigeon that perched on the kitchen windowsill. He asked Leo questions in a slow, difficult but sincere voice, and he was amazed by the wisdom of this 5-year-old child. "Leo," Arthur asked one afternoon, "are you afraid of the dark?" Leo thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, but my mom says darkness isn't the enemy. Darkness is just where the light hasn't reached yet." Arthur smiled. "Your mom is very wise," Leo smiled proudly. "Yes, my mom is the best person in the world." And in that moment, Arthur understood that he had found something more precious than all the money, all the power, all the success he had spent his life pursuing. He had found family. Not the family he was born into. Not the family he thought he needed. But the family he deserved to have after finally learning how to be human. Meanwhile, Carlton Webb worked tirelessly in the shadows. He collected security camera footage from the 80th floor of the Vance Capital building. Fortunately, the building's camera system stored data for 90 days before overwriting. And on that footage, clear as day, was Evelyn Cross walking into the pantry, snatching the phone from Elena's hand, throwing it into the sink, and threatening her. Carlton also collected testimony from Elena. She sat in his office for 3 hours, recounting every detail about the 6 a.m. shift, about the sound of the shattered cup, about those 18 minutes in the stairwell, about the fear of deportation and losing her son. Carlton recorded it all, and he prepared the files, not just for the civil lawsuit, but for the criminal complaint to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and the FBI. He also gathered evidence of the suspicious transactions Evelyn had made over the past 3 months. Asset sales at below-market prices, contracts signed with companies in which Evelyn had stakes, funds transferred to offshore accounts. The evidence piled up, and Carlton knew it was time. He called Arthur one evening. "Arthur, we have enough. Are you ready?" Arthur looked out the window, where the lights of Manhattan sparkled in the night. He thought about Elena, about Leo, about everything he had lost and everything he had found. "Ready," he said. May 15th, exactly 3 months after Arthur's stroke, the Vance Capital Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting at Evelyn Cross's request. The agenda: an official vote to appoint her as permanent CEO, replacing Arthur Vance. Arthur Vance, who was considered no longer capable of running the company due to severe health conditions and no possibility of recovery. The meeting took place in the large conference room on the 79th floor of the Vance Capital building. All 12 board members were present. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, wearing a white suit, her face confident, her smile triumphant. Beside her were Trent, Ashley, and Derek, Arthur's 3 children, invited to attend as major shareholders and legal heirs. Evelyn stood up, adjusting the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, thank you all for being here today. As you know, Arthur Vance suffered a severe stroke 3 months ago. His condition is very poor, paralyzed on one side, unable to speak, with no possibility of recovery. According to the corporate charter, Article 12, Section 4, I propose that the board officially vote to appoint me as permanent CEO of Vance Capital." She smiled, looking around the table. "Does anyone have any objections?" Silence. "Then I call for a vote." The conference room door burst open, and Arthur Vance walked in, not in a wheelchair, but on his own 2 feet, though still slightly limping, his right hand resting on Carlton Webb's arm for balance. The room fell into absolute silence. Arthur wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, a deep red tie. His face was still slightly twisted on the right side, but his eyes, those sharp pale blue eyes, shone with alertness and power. Evelyn stood frozen, her face white as a sheet. "Arthur? What are you doing here? You can't." Arthur didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly to the head of the table, facing Evelyn. He looked at her, then at Trent, Ashley, Derek, his children sitting there, mouths agape, eyes wide. Then he looked at the board of directors. And he spoke. His voice was slow, difficult, each word carefully pronounced. But everyone in the room heard clearly. "I am Arthur Vance, and I am still the CEO of this company." Evelyn forced a laugh. "Arthur, this is impossible. Your medical records say medical records," Arthur cut in, "were faked to protect me from those who wanted me dead." He turned to Carlton. "Carlton, please." Carlton stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and took out a stack of documents. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I am Carlton Webb, Mr. Arthur Vance's personal attorney. I am here to inform you that Mr. Vance has fully recovered his cognitive and communicative abilities. He has full legal capacity to continue running Vance Capital." Evelyn scoffed. "That's not true. He can't." And Carlton continued, his voice sharp, "I am also here to present evidence of criminal conduct by Miss Evelyn Cross." The room fell into deadly silence. Carlton turned on the projector, and on the large screen, the security camera footage from the morning of February 14th. The footage began to play. Everyone in the room watched Evelyn walk into the pantry, see Arthur on the floor, snatch the phone from Elena's hand, throw it into the sink. They heard Evelyn's voice, clear as day. I know your visa status, Elena. I know you're in the middle of a renewal period, and I know that if you're arrested for trespassing and theft of corporate property, yes, I'll say you broke into the CEO's pantry to steal his Rolex, ICE will be here in 10 minutes. You'll be deported immediately. And your son, Leo, he'll be taken into state foster care. The room was deathly quiet. Trent, Ashley, Derek, Arthur's 3 children, sat there, faces white, unable to look their father in the eye. The footage continued. Elena backing away, running out of the pantry, hiding in the stairwell. Arthur lying on the floor, helpless, while Evelyn stood there, watching the clock, waiting. 18 minutes. When the footage ended, Carlton turned off the projector and turned to the board. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just saw is clear evidence of intentional obstruction of medical emergency assistance, resulting in permanent injury to Mr. Arthur Vance. Ms. Evelyn Cross deliberately delayed calling for emergency help for 18 minutes, causing irreparable damage to Mr. Vance's health, just to ensure that he would be unable to continue running the company. He took out another stack of documents. This is a criminal complaint filed with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office this morning, with charges of intentional infliction of serious injury, obstruction of medical emergency assistance, and insurance fraud. The FBI has also been notified of possible federal securities law violations. Evelyn stood there, her face gray, her hands trembling. This is slander. And Carlton cut in. This is a civil lawsuit demanding $50 million in damages for the health and income losses Mr. Vance has suffered due to her actions. Evelyn collapsed into her chair, her face in her hands. Arthur looked at her, his face expressionless. Then he turned to Trent, Ashley, Derek. "My children," he said, his voice slow. "How many times did you visit your father in the past 3 months?" Silence. "Trent, you came once, talked about the will, then left." Trent bowed his head, unable to look his father in the eye. "Ashley, you came once, cried, then left for a party." Ashley began to cry, but this time they weren't calculated tears. This time it was real shame. "Derek, you came once, stayed 11 minutes, then left." Derek sat there, his face red, unable to say a word. Arthur took a deep breath. "I spent my whole life building an empire. I thought that success was everything, but I was wrong." He looked at Elena, standing at the back of the room, tears streaming down her face. "This woman, Elena Vargas, was fired by me 3 months ago because of a memo about legal risk. I threw her out like garbage, but when I lay on the floor, she was the only one who tried to save me." He paused, trying to control his emotions, "and when I woke up, she was the only one who came to visit me every day. With her son Leo, a child I had never even looked in the eye." The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Arthur turned to Carlton. "Carlton, please, read the new will." Carlton nodded, opening the final document. "This is the new will of Mr. Arthur Vance, legally signed and notarized on May 10th. According to this will," he read aloud, each word clear. 1. Trent, Ashley, and Derek Vance will not inherit any shares of Vance Capital. Instead, each will receive a trust fund worth $5 million, enough to live comfortably but not enough to destroy the company. Arthur's 3 children sat there, faces white, unable to believe what they were hearing. 2. Evelyn Cross will be immediately terminated from her position as COO and removed from the board of directors. She will face criminal and civil proceedings as stated. Evelyn began to cry, but no one felt sorry for her. 3. Elena Vargas will be appointed Executive Director of the Vance Charitable Foundation, a new foundation established to support healthcare workers, immigrants, and disadvantaged children. This foundation will be funded by $50 million from Mr. Vance's personal assets. Elena covered her mouth with her hand, tears falling. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. 4. Leo Vargas will receive a full education fund, covering all tuition from kindergarten through college, along with lifetime medical expenses. Arthur turned to Elena, his voice softer. "Elena, I'm sorry. I was wrong about everything, and I can't fix the past. But I can try to do right from now on." A plea for forgiveness from the bottom of his heart. She knelt beside Arthur and hugged him, A gentle hug, but one that contained all the forgiveness she had held in her heart for the past 3 months. Arthur closed his eyes, and for the first time in 40 years he cried. Not tears of anger, not tears of helplessness, but tears of liberation. 6 months later, Arthur Vance sat in his new office on the 82nd floor of the Vance Capital building. This office was completely different from the old one. There were pictures on the walls, not of awards or newspaper articles, but of Elena and Leo, of Sarah and her family, of the people he had met on his journey of recovery. There was a green plant in the corner, a small chair by the window where he could sit and look out at Central Park. He still needed a cane to move around, and his voice was still slow and difficult. But he had recovered significantly. He could write, could talk on the phone, could attend board meetings. And more importantly, he had changed. Vance Capital was no longer a ruthless machine focused only on optimizing profits. Arthur had changed the company culture, focusing on employee welfare, on social responsibility, on treating people as human beings rather than numbers on a balance sheet. The Vance Charitable Foundation, run by Elena, had helped hundreds of families, immigrants needing legal support, healthcare workers needing financial assistance, children needing access to education and healthcare. And Leo, now 6 years old, often came to Arthur's office after school. The boy sat in the small chair by the window, doing his homework while Arthur worked. Sometimes Arthur would stop and look at the boy, wondering how a 5-year-old could teach him more than all the years he had spent at the pinnacle of power. One Saturday afternoon, Arthur took Leo to the Central Park Zoo. They walked along the tree-lined paths, Leo holding Arthur's hand. Arthur's right hand could now grip, though still weak. The boy pointed at the animals, asked hundreds of questions, and Arthur patiently answered each one. When they reached the lion enclosure, Leo stopped, staring at the male lion sleeping under a tree. "Mr. Arthur," the boy said, his voice serious, "is that lion lonely?" Arthur looked at the lion, then at Leo. "Why, do you ask?" Leo shrugged. It's alone. No, family." Arthur knelt down, difficult, but he managed to be at Leo's eye level. "Leo, sometimes we think that being alone is strong, but actually, being alone is lonely, and loneliness isn't strength." Leo thought for a moment, then nodded. "So that lion needs a friend." Arthur smiled. "Yes, it needs a friend." Leo took Arthur's hand and pulled him up. "So can we be its friend?" Arthur nodded, tears in his eyes. "Yes, we are its friend." They continued walking along the paths, a 69-year-old man with a cane and a 6-year-old boy with sneakers flashing blue lights. And in that moment, Arthur Vance understood that he had found something more precious than all the money, all the power, all the success he had spent his life pursuing. He had found family. Not the family he was born into, not the family he thought he needed, but the family he deserved to have after finally learning how to be human. As the sun began to set, painting the Manhattan sky in shades of orange and purple, Arthur and Leo sat on a park bench, looking out at the sparkling lake. Leo rested his head on Arthur's shoulder, his eyes heavy from a long day of playing. "Mr. Arthur," the boy whispered, "can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Ask away." Leo was silent for a moment, then said, "Are you happy now?" Arthur looked out at the lake, at the ducks swimming, at the families strolling through the park. He thought about the empty penthouse on the 82nd floor, about the meals eaten alone, about the silence he had once considered a symbol of power. Then he looked at Leo, the child who had brought light into his darkness, who had taught him that true strength isn't about controlling others, but about letting others touch your heart. "Yes," Arthur said, his voice soft but certain. "Very happy." Leo smiled, and in that moment Arthur knew this was the most precious moment of his life. Not the moment he signed his first billion-dollar contract. Not the moment he was honored on the cover of Forbes magazine. Not the moment he stood at the pinnacle of Wall Street, looking down at the world. But this moment, sitting on a park bench, with a child who wasn't blood-related but had become everything to him, watching the sunset and knowing that finally he had found his way home. Home to his true self, home to his true family, home to his true life. And Arthur Vance, the Ice King of Wall Street, who had once believed that emotions were weakness and connection was risk, finally understood the simplest truth. That love isn't something you lose when you give it away. It's the only thing that multiplies when you share it. Asterisk, if this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear this message. That true success isn't about what you accumulate, but what you give. Asterisk, that forgiveness isn't a sign of weakness but a sign of strength, and that sometimes the people we think matter least are the ones who matter most. Asterisk, Arthur, Elena, and Leo's story reminds us that it's never too late to change. It's never too late to apologize. Asterisk, it's never too late to become the person we were meant to be. Asterisk, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring about these characters and their journey. And thank you for believing that everyone deserves a second chance, even when they don't think they deserve one. Asterisk, if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about redemption, about love, about the power of compassion, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We'll bring you new stories every week, stories that will make you reflect, move you, and perhaps change the way you see the world. See you in the next story.